Welcome to our TOBER session. This session is called Transferring to Clark. We're going to talk a little bit about the transfer application process. And I'm joined by student Emily Dean, who is a transfer student at Clark, and she'll talk a little bit about her experience as well. But before we get started, I just want to talk a little bit about how this technology works tonight. So if you have a question for any of the panelists as we're going through the presentation, please use the Q&A feature. Depending on how your screen is set up, you should see a Q&A box either at the top or the bottom. So please ask your questions there. If you have any technology issues, if you suddenly can't see or hear us, please use the chat feature. We'll check the chat periodically just to make sure that nobody's having any technological issues. But before we officially get started, I'd like to have my panelists introduce themselves. So Emily, would you go first?
Sure. Hi, my name is Emily. I'm a junior at Clark, and I'm a transfer student. So I just transferred last year, and this is my second year at Clark. I'm studying English, and I am currently in the process of applying to Clark's fifth year Masters of Arts in Teaching program. And outside of the classroom, I work in the admissions office as a student ambassador, and I'm involved in a few clubs on campus, such as Her Campus and Main Idea.
Great, thank you. And Jen?
Hi everyone, my name is Jen Plant. I'm Associate Dean of Academic Services. I also sit on the Transfer Credit Committee and oversee the Office of Academic Support, Academic Advising, Student Accessibility Services, and the Writing Center. Awesome. And I'm also a Clark alum.
Great. So Jen will talk a little bit about the credit evaluation process for transfer students as we go through. But we'll start off by just talking a little bit about who is a transfer student. I think sometimes this gets a little tricky depending on kind of where you are in your education. But if you are currently enrolled in a degree-seeking program in the U.S. or outside the U.S., if you've studied full-time at a college or university, even if you withdrew before receiving grades, or if you have enrolled in or completed a 2-year program, we consider you a transfer student. So you would want to apply to Clark using our transfer application. If you have enrolled in college courses just to complete a high school diploma, like dual enrollment courses, or if you want to attend Clark part-time for night classes, we wouldn't consider you a transfer student. So if you are a high school student who's in dual enrollment program, you would apply as a first-year student, and we would take your dual enrollment classes. Or if you want to attend Clark part-time for night classes, we would encourage you to contact Clark School of Professional Studies. So for transfer students, we have 2 different deadlines to apply. So we have deadlines for fall admissions and for spring admissions. So if you are looking to start at Clark in spring, we have an application deadline of November 1st for the spring semester. For the notifications for all transfer students, whether you apply in the spring or the fall, we use rolling admissions. So that means that as soon as your application is complete and we have everything we need to make a decision, it'll take about 2 weeks from that time for you to receive a decision from us. So if you apply and get your application in on November 1st, it should be about mid-November that you would receive a decision. And the same goes for financial aid forms. If you're applying for financial aid, you want to make sure that you apply and get those in at the same time as your admission. And if you're awarded financial aid and or a scholarship, that will come with your acceptance letter. For fall admissions, if you're looking to start at Clark next fall, we would have a application deadline of May 1st. So it's rolling. You can start applying in February all the way through May 1st. And again, as soon as your application is complete, we will notify you, and it'll take about 2 weeks, and you'll want to apply for financial aid at the same time. A few things to go over with our transfer application. So if you are applying as a transfer student, I think one of the most important things to know is that we use our own transfer application for transfer students, we do not use the common application. So it might be a little bit different than if you had already applied to Clark as a first-year student. For first-year students, we do use the common application, but for transfer students, we ask that you use our own application. So you can find that on our website. You go to clarku.edu and go to the admissions page for transfer students, you'll find the transfer application there. The reason for this is that it's actually a little bit shorter and a little bit easier. There's a lot of information in that we don't necessarily need from the Common App for transfer students, so we just kind of want to have you only have to fill out the information that we need as a transfer student. When you're applying as a transfer student, we also will ask for one letter of recommendation from a recent instructor. So hopefully that will be a professor that you've had in the classroom recently. If you've been out of the classroom for a while and aren't able to get a professor, we will accept a letter of recommendation from somebody else who knows you well. Maybe that might be an employer or a community member that you work with. We just ask that it's not a family member. So we prefer an academic reference if you're currently in school or have recently been in school, but if it's been a while, we will accept letters from other members of the community. Some other forms that we ask for from transfer students that sometimes get a bit confusing are the college report form and the midterm report. So the college report form is also a PDF that you can find on our website. This form basically asks you to bring it to your college registrar or college dean, someone who has access to your academic and student records, and they just need to confirm for us that you are in good standing or that you were in good standing at your former university. So we ask that they fill that out and send it back to us. All of these forms can be emailed to us at transferadmissions@clarku.edu. So that's what the college report form is, just a confirmation that you were in good standing or you are in good standing, and making sure that you're not going to fail out of your current university or that you didn't have any disciplinary issues. The midterm report form, that is an optional form, except if you've been in college for only your first semester. So if you're currently in your first semester of college and you are looking to transfer to Clark, we do ask for the midterm report form just so that we have a sense of how you're doing in your classes. So if you've only had one semester and you don't have any grades yet, we think it's important to know what your grades are like in your college classes, because we do emphasize your college courses a little bit more strongly than your high school record as a transfer. So we'll ask you to download the midterm report, email that to your professors or bring it to your professors, have them fill it out. Just gives us a sense of how you're performing kind of at the midterm or halfway through your semester, so we know kind of what your college grades look like. We do ask for an unofficial final high school transcript and an unofficial college transcript from all of the institutions that you have attended. So again, these can be unofficial copies. They don't have to be official for when you're applying. So if you have unofficial copies of these, you can add them to your application or email them to us at transferadmissions@clarku.edu. If you do decide to come to Clark, if you're accepted and you enroll, we will ask for official copies of both of these. But for the application stage, we just ask that you send us the unofficial copies. Clark is also a test optional university, and that also goes for transfer students. So when you're applying as a transfer student, it will be up to you whether or not you want us to use your SAT or ACT scores. I think Clark has always known that, for students who are applying, one day that you took the SAT or the ACT may not be exactly representative of how hard you've worked throughout your academic career, whether that's in high school or in your college courses. So if that's the case for you, don't feel like you have to send your SAT scores or ACT scores. We read applications holistically. We look at all of these factors that are in your application, from your transcript to your letters of recommendation to your essay, and so don't feel like you'll be at a disadvantage if you don't send SAT scores. Like I said before, when we evaluate transfer applicants, what you've done most recently is the most important to us. So your grades from college are going to be more important than your grades from high school, although we still will look at them. But what you've done most recently kind of shows us that you're prepared academically for college. So we'll look at the college courses more importantly than high school or than SAT scores. And lastly, if you are applying for financial aid as a transfer student to Clark, we do ask that you submit both the FAFSA and the CSS profile at the time of your application as well. This will allow us to get you a financial aid package with your acceptance letter if you're accepted to Clark as a transfer student. For international students, if you're an international transfer student, you would just fill out the CSS profile. And all transfer students are considered for both need-based and merit-based scholarships. So if you're applying to Clark as a transfer, you're still eligible for those merit scholarships. There's nothing separate that you have to do. There's no separate application. You just have to apply and we'll automatically consider you for a merit scholarship. And one thing that is not required, so it's not on the checklist, but I did want to mention it, is that we do offer transfer students the opportunity to interview. And I think that interviewing for transfer students is definitely really important because every single transfer student has such a different story and such a different background on where you are academically and why you want to come to Clark or why you want to transfer. So I would highly encourage you, if you are thinking about applying as a transfer student, to do an interview. It's a great opportunity to connect with an admissions counselor and really be able to tell your story. And I think it helps us learn a great deal about you in the process as we're looking at those transcripts and gives us a little bit more context to kind of where you are and why you want to transfer. So you can sign up for those on our website. We've got lots of transfer interview slots available. So I definitely would recommend doing a transfer interview. Just to know about international transfer students, so if you are an international student, there are a couple extra steps to the process of things that are required for your application. The first is a foreign credit evaluation. So if you're applying from a university outside of the United States, we do require you to submit your transcripts to a foreign credit evaluation service. And so the reason for this is that this provides us with a little bit more information sort of in terms of determining your GPA relative to the American grading system, being able to determine the eligibility of the coursework that you've done at your classes, and also helps us determine your class standing as you're coming in as a transfer student to Clark. Because there are so many different grading systems throughout the world, submitting this to a foreign credit evaluation just kind of streamlines the process for us a little bit and helps us just better understand what your grades mean and in the context of your university. So if you go to our website, we do have a number of suggested foreign credit evaluation services that you can find, and we have their contact information. So it is up to you as a student to kind of do this and get this done. We can definitely recommend places if you have questions about that. If you are a student who comes from English is not your first language or comes from a non-English speaking country, we do ask that you take the TOEFL, the IELTS, or use Duolingo as a way to use your English language proficiency. So that's kind of an additional part of the process. So you can take one of those tests. Duolingo is actually the easiest. You can do it right online from the comfort of your own home. So I would definitely recommend Duolingo if you're looking to take one of those tests as an international transfer student. Again, for financial aid, you would just submit the CSS profile. You don't need to submit the FAFSA. And then for any student who has sort of national examinations, those are optional, but feel free to submit anything like A-levels or the GCSE, just to kind of give us another kind of sense of your academic coursework and what you've done post high school. So now I'm going to turn it over to Jen, and Jen's going to just talk a little bit about her role kind of in evaluating credits and transferring credits. We get a lot of questions about what transfers to Clark and how that works. So I'm going to let her talk a little bit about that process.
Yeah, so as you can see on this slide, up to 50% of the degree and major requirements can transfer into Clark, right? In practical terms, this means 64 credits, or what translates into 16 Clark units. It makes sense that we are asking you to complete at least 2 academic years at Clark. You're going to be earning a Clark degree, so we want at least half of your experience in the classroom to be the Clark classroom experience. You will receive credit for most courses taken at a regionally accredited college or university, so long as you earn a C or better. And what we do as the Transfer Credit Evaluation Committee is we look at your official transcript or transcripts and basically break down your credits that will come in, and then take a look at your courses. So as we're looking at your transcript, what we will sometimes do is go to your university that you're coming from, look up these course details, read the course descriptions, and try to figure out if there's a Clark course equivalent, so that when your transcript comes in, it will reflect a bit more that the course you took at Syracuse is actually equivalent to a Clark course called English 20, for example. So we try to do that as best as possible. It's not always a quick process on our end. Sometimes we have to talk to students and ask them for syllabi, for example, if we're not quite sure about courses that may transfer in for the major. But for the most part, when we look at your transcript, we are able to figure out how many credits are coming in very quickly. That's the easy one. But what those courses will transfer into Clark as. I think, the other thing I wanted to mention, and this is kind of getting in the weeds a little bit, but I'll throw it out there for you. If you are one of those students coming in with, you could potentially have more than 16 Clark units, what we try to do is, instead of awarding you the full number of credits that would transfer in for all of your courses, we shave some credits off in order that all of the coursework you've done can be reflected on what will then be your Clark transcript. So in other words, if you could potentially come in with 17 units, we're going to shave a couple of credits off a couple of courses so that we can have all of your coursework reflected on that transcript. I hope that made sense. But what we really want is for everything you've done in the past to be listed on and reflected on that Clark transcript. And if you come in with advanced placement credits or A-levels, as Nicole mentioned earlier, we'll need official copies of those things as well, but those certainly can transfer in as well.
Great, thank you. I think it's also important to know that we will give you a transfer credit valuation at the time of your admission. So when you apply, kind of what happens is the application kind of goes to the admissions office, we read it and evaluate it, and then it goes over to Jen's office, and Jen and her team will take a look at it and kind of do the credit evaluation and then get back to us, so that when we let you know if you've been admitted, you will have a credit evaluation telling you which courses are going to transfer and what they transfer into Clark. So before you make a decision on whether or not you're going to come to Clark, you should have a pretty good idea of kind of what credits you're coming in with and what classes they'll count for. And at that point, if you have any questions, you can definitely feel free to reach out to us, and we can talk with you further about, like Jen said, if we need more information or we just need to chat with you a little bit more. We'll talk a little bit more about that. So now I want to turn it over to Emily. So Emily, I want to kind of give you the student perspective on what it's like to be a transfer student at Clark. So Emily, could you tell us a little bit about your transfer experience? Like, why did you decide to come to Clark as a transfer student, and what was it like sort of integrating yourself into the Clark community?
Sure. So I transferred to Clark from a community college. So I did my first 2 years at community college. And Clark was actually my top choice when I was looking at schools to transfer to. I had heard about it from some people who went to Clark, and also people from my high school who went to Clark, and just kind of being familiar with the Worcester area. So I visited Clark. I came to do my interview and take a tour. And I really got the sense that it was a place that I wanted to be. It seemed very socially involved, especially since I was transferring from a community college where, even though it's called a community college, there isn't really a strong sense of community. It's a commuter school, so people would go to classes and leave. I kind of felt like I was missing out on a lot of different experiences. Even though I was grateful to have been able to like start at community college and save money, I still was looking forward to like being able to kind of get a more involved college experience. So I transferred to Clark, or I applied to Clark as a transfer student. I was trying to choose between Clark and two other schools. However, Clark was really my top choice, and it was actually the most affordable option for me and my family, which was really cool. And when I was making that decision of coming into Clark and like kind of transitioning in, I really just tried to stay in contact with people in the admissions office, have my questions answered. I remember I called the admissions office and the financial aid office like a lot this summer before I transferred in, just because I had a lot of questions. I had obviously never done this before, so they were really helpful. I also was able to get connected to some other incoming transfer students over Facebook. So I had some friends coming in who I'm still friends with now, which is really cool. And of course, when I came, I was also involved in the orientation in a specific transfer group.
Yeah. Could you talk a little bit more about the orientation? Because I know a lot of transfer students kind of always want to know, like, what does orientation look like for transfer students? Like, how is it different? And like, how did it kind of help you with that transition?
Sure. So when I came in, I was assigned to a transfer specific orientation group. And every orientation group is led by a peer mentor. So every incoming student gets one in the fall. However, since I was a transfer student, I was assigned to a group with other transfer students that was led by a transfer student peer mentor. So her name was Jess, and she had transferred the year before. So it was really helpful to kind of like be with other students who were having like a very similar experience, and have another transfer student that I could like ask questions to and kind of get answers that were very specific to my experience. I remember she was very like just very comforting in terms of letting us know like the first few weeks as a transfer student, obviously it's like very new. It takes a lot to get used to, but she was like super right when she said that like after the first few weeks, you just feel like right at home along with all the other first year students.
That's great. And what about getting involved on campus? Like, I know sometimes transfer students are, a little bit worried about like making friends or, kind of joining clubs, existing clubs, or people sort of already know each other. How was that experience for you, kind of joining clubs and organizations, or just meeting new people?
So like I said earlier, I was able to connect with a few people on Facebook who were other transfer students. So when you apply to Clark and you get in, you have the option of being added to a Facebook group with other incoming students. And usually people will just like do their introductions on that page, transfer students included. And I included in my little like introduction that I was a transfer student. And one of my friends now, her name is Shay, she reached out to me saying, oh, I'm another transfer student. I would love to like meet you, like hang out, get to know each other, since we're both going to be coming in as transfer students. And then we met another friend of ours named Anna. So I'm still friends with both of them today. However, they're not my only friends. I've still been able to make friends at Clark, just like regular first year students. One thing that I would recommend is joining clubs. I would say that's how a lot of Clark students tend to meet their friends or just meet the people that they hang out with the most. Definitely just getting involved on campus. I was definitely shy coming into the transfer student just because I felt like I'm not exactly a first year student, so I don't have that experience, but I don't have the same experience as other sophomores and juniors. However, all of the clubs that I were interested in were just like super welcoming, and definitely a great way to kind of get involved and meet people. So other than that, like I know I kind of had this like mental blockage of like, oh, I feel weird, and like as a transfer student, like no one's gonna understand me, but that was not the case at all.
That's great. That's nice to hear, and I think it's great you were able to connect with some transfer students on social media before you even got to campus. Um, what about kind of like any like academic transitions? Like, was there anything in terms of like declaring your major, or kind of working with advising, or kind of just finding any differences in sort of kind of adjusting to the academic life at Clark?
Sure. So I came into Clark. Well, when I was at Greenfield Community College, I was just a liberal arts major. I didn't really have anything specific, but I knew that I was going to have to pick something soon coming into a four-year institution. So I went with sociology because I had taken some sociology courses that I really liked. So my first semester, I was majoring in sociology. I really liked all the professors in that department, and I thought the classes were interesting. But I think one thing that I missed the most was taking English classes. And my dad was an English major, my sister's an English major, so I just felt like I had to keep up the family tradition. So I actually switched over to English for my second semester at Clark. However, that process of switching majors was super easy, even for a transfer student. So I met with my sociology academic advisor during the first semester, about halfway through, saying that I was thinking about switching majors, and she was super helpful in terms of getting me connected to the head of the English department and going through the whole process of switching majors. And I always say, like, it's super easy to switch majors at Clark if you want to, and if I can do it as a transfer student and have it be like a really easy process, then anyone can do it. As long as you like know what you want to do, you can make it happen at Clark.
Yeah, that's great to hear, because I feel like a lot of the transfer students that I've been hearing from are feel like there's maybe a little bit more pressure on them to know what they want to do or know what they want to major because they're coming in as like a sophomore or junior. So it's great to know that you kind of had that support in switching your major, even though you were a transfer student once you got to campus.
And if I can jump in real quick, Emily, you just talked about how you sort of knew you were migrating toward the English department. For students who come in thinking they're going to be sociology, and then for one reason or another, the department's outstanding, but for one reason or another, you just decide that that's not for you. We do have, but you don't know what you want. We do have offices and resources who will work with you to help you figure that out.
Yeah, I think that's the nice thing about Clark is there are a lot of resources for students, and because we're a smaller school, you're going to get that personal attention of people who are going to be able to help you figure out that process. And as one last question, Emily, you sort of mentioned, kind of giving advice on joining clubs and getting involved. Do you have any other advice for incoming transfer students? Like, what would your advice be to kind of a new transfer student who's starting at Clark?
This is kind of like a reiteration of what I already said, but really just getting involved. I think when I came to Clark, like my biggest problem was myself in terms of like not wanting to, or I wanted to break out of my shell, but I just felt scared to, and I was just really nervous about like meeting new people, being in like a bigger school than what I transferred from. But my biggest piece of advice would just be to like don't limit yourself in terms of like what you think you can do as a transfer student. You're absolutely always welcome to join any club, become friends with anyone. You don't have to just stick with transfer students. Just like really recognizing that you're just as much a part of a community as the incoming first year students and the students who have already been there. So definitely getting involved and just, I know it's easier said than done, but like trying to overcome that like barrier that you set up for yourself.
Mm-hmm. Maybe Jen, I'll ask the same question of you. Do you have any advice for transfer students coming in, maybe from more of like an academic standpoint?
Get connected. The amazing thing about Clark is that there are tons of folks on our campus and tons of offices, and that includes administration, faculty, staff, and other students who just want to support you. We love working with Clarkies. Clarkies love working with Clarkies. So get connected, because there are tons of support systems out there, and you never have to figure out on your own how to do something. There's always somebody who is willing to help you.
Awesome. All right, so now we're going to take some questions, and I think we have a few in the Q&A. So if you do have any questions for Emily or for Jen, please feel free to put those in the Q&A, and we'll answer those as best we can. So I'm going to start with this one. So this one is for Jen. How are language credits determined for transfers? So for example, if the student took ASL, so how would that kind of transfer over to Clark?
So language is a little bit tricky, but so if the student who asked this question, if you took ASL 1, we do have an equivalent, so that would transfer in. If you took a second semester of American Sign Language, that too would transfer in, and then you would have completed something called the language perspective. So there are a number of liberal arts perspectives at Clark that you need to complete in one way or another before you graduate, and one of those is language. And so with 2 semesters of American Sign Language, you will have completed that. Similarly, if you took Introductory Spanish 1 at your previous institution, that will transfer in. You would need to take another Spanish course at Clark or at your other institution to come in and fulfill the language perspective. Now, there's a little trick about language. If you took, for example, 3 years of Spanish in high school, we have at Clark language placement based on the number of years you took it in that language in high school. So 3 years of Spanish in high school would place you at intermediate Spanish. So if you took 3 years of high school Spanish, but then took introductory Spanish at your previous institution, we most likely, because that's below intermediate where Clark would place you, we most likely would not accept that credit. That said, not all Spanish classes, not all language classes are created equally. So if you suspect that your language course, even though it's below where your Clark placement would be, actually matches Clark's language or anything like that, if you have any questions about the language classes in particular, because those are a little bit tricky, feel free to work with academic advising or me. And what we will do is we will work closely with the language department, take a look at this would be an instance where we'd probably ask you for your syllabus, take a look at the syllabus and figure out whether or not that course would transfer in. I hope I answered that question.
Yeah, thank you. So another question is, some of my classes were pass-fail last semester due to COVID. Will those be transferred?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if you cast your memories back to the slide that talks about transfer credit, I said only classes that for which you earned a C or better will transfer in. And that goes for pass-fail classes. So, you know, typically if you took a class pass-fail and got a pass, we would need to ensure with your university that pass is equal to a C or better. The exception to that, because it's going to be the exception historically to most things, is spring 2020. In the spring of 2020, if a pass grade is equivalent to a C- or better, that class will transfer in. But it's only for spring 2020 classes, so far anyways.
Yeah, I know spring 2020 sort of threw a little wrench in that for everyone. So we are going to try and be, work with you as possible and know that, a lot of you may not have had a choice in how your university, went to a pass-fail grade because of COVID. So those are instances where you may be working a little bit more closely with Jen's team or with academic advising to make sure that it fulfills that requirement. So we had a question about, it was in the chat, but I'm going to ask it now. So the question is, for the letters of recommendation, is it important what subject the professor teaches, and is math or science preferred? So for us, I would say it doesn't necessarily matter what subject the professor teaches, or we don't have a preferred subject for your letter of recommendation. I would say making sure that the professor just knows you well and can speak to your academic abilities in the classroom is really just what we're looking for from the letter of recommendation. So there's no specific type of professor or subject that they have to teach that you need to look for. I would say someone who knows you well, kind of like high school letters of recommendation. It doesn't necessarily have to be the professor where you got an easy A in the course. It can be a class where maybe it was a little bit more challenging. You had to go to office hours to talk to your professor, or you worked really hard to improve your grade in that course. So I'd say someone who can kind of just speak to your academic abilities as a student in a college course is kind of what we're looking for from the letter of recommendation. So we have a question about transfer orientation this spring with COVID. Jen, I don't know if you know anything about this, do you?
No.
No, this is one that I'm actually not 100% certain either. I know that there will be an orientation. I think it's going to depend on what the state of the world looks like and sort of what Clark is doing in the spring, whether or not it will be in person or whether it will be virtual. I know that we worked really hard this fall to get students to campus and to have them be on campus and be mostly in person with sort of a hybrid of some online classes. And so there was kind of a hybrid in-person / virtual orientation this fall. I would expect that it'll be something similar for the spring, although I can't say with certainty, depending on whether there's a second wave of this or if cases get worse. So it's hard to say right now, but I would say stay tuned and we'll definitely let you know as soon as we know what orientation is going to look like this spring. And then there was one more question in the chat that I wanted to address. Jen, I think this one might be for you. How easy is it to get academic help, such as tutoring? And then maybe Emily, you can answer this. Are study groups common?
Yeah, so I'll address the tutoring question. It's super easy. So we have both a writing center and something called a Q center, but they're housed in the academic support center. So you can definitely get help with your writing. And this is writing for anything. We most often see papers for essays for courses. But you can, if you're planning on studying abroad, bring in your study abroad application essays, literally anything you can bring to the writing center. Housed on the other side of the academic support center is the Q Center, the Quantitative Resource Center, and that is for, that's a tutoring resource for courses that are more math-based, so statistics, calculus. We also have tutors who will tutor you in economics, chemistry, biology, computer science, I think a couple management courses. It largely depends on the tutors who are hired that year. But just a ton of different kinds of supports for different kinds of classes. In addition, there are academic success tutors, and all the tutors are peers, incidentally. But these are students who will work with you on things like time management, study skills, all those other kinds of academic pieces that are important, and super easy to make appointments. All of our schedules are online, so it's just literally with a click of the button you can schedule an appointment with either the writing center or the rest of the academic support.
Great. And Emily, how common are study groups? Do those happen pretty naturally, or like how do students kind of come together to form study groups?
So I think obviously it more depends on like the student and what the student wants. But study groups, I would say, are pretty common. If you want to be a part of one, if you're like just make friends with people in your class and you want to get together to study for the midterm or the final, that's like really common. One thing I really like about Clark is how it has more of a collaborative than competitive nature. So a lot of students are willing to get together to work on projects or just study together. And a lot of students want to see other students succeed and get the help they need.
Yeah, I was just going to say the same thing. I think that the great thing about Clark is that our students are so collaborative. They're not they're competitive, I would say, maybe with themselves more than they are with other students. It's not like a cutthroat environment where someone's not going to share their notes because they don't want you to, get a better grade than them on a test. I think that Clarkies are very collaborative, and it's a very community-oriented place. So you'll definitely see students kind of helping each other out in academic area in terms of studying. But yeah, it's probably a personal preference whether or not you want to study on your own or sometimes study with other people. But I think the nice thing about our students is that they are collaborative, so it definitely happens. So another question that just came in is, how easy is it to get involved in research? Emily, I don't know if you do any research on campus or you have maybe any friends who do research.
I haven't done any research yet, but I know there's like a couple of different ways to get involved. One way is like through your capstone, which is a course that you take during your junior or senior year. And it's kind of just like the capstone of your major. So it's led by a professor. It looks different depending on what department or what professor it is, but it's like an opportunity where you can kind of work on your own semester-long project. I know that someone from the admissions office, for her capstone, she wrote like 3 episodes of a sitcom. Some people do like some sort of research. It really can be whatever you want in terms of like what your professor is supporting you through. But that's one way you can. Also, since Clark is a research institution, 100% of our full-time faculty are involved in some sort of research. So if you're really close with professors, you can always get involved, or you can ask them if there's anything you could do to help, or just support them in any way, or just, I'm not sure, like in terms of other forms of research, but I know there's like other ways to get involved too.
We, there is this ability at Clark to work with professors, if the professors have the capacity to do so, on something called the directed study. And you might know what that is, but if there's something that you want to study or research, you can find a faculty person who has the capacity, the time, and is willing to work with you on this directed study, and really help you, find that passion and, fulfill that study. I'm working with a student next semester whose passion is comic books. And she and I are going to sit down and do a directed study in the spring. And she's going to do a bunch of research on, I believe that something about the sort of Jewish slant of a lot of early comics, and the incarnation of early superheroes being tied to elements of Judaism and things like that. So that's, that's also an option for students, and finding faculty who share your interests and things is usually super easy if you just ask around.
Yeah, I remember a student, I think she graduated last spring, but when she was talking about her capstone, the way that she ended up doing her capstone was she had this idea for what she wanted to study, but she really hadn't studied it too much. So she went to one of her professors and said, hey, I want to study this. This is what I'm thinking about. And he said, well, why don't you do a directed study with me first? So she kind of did an independent directed study with this professor, learned more about it, and then was able to take that and turn that into her capstone project in her senior year. So this was something that she knew she wanted to study, but just didn't sort of know how to start or what resources there were. And just by approaching her professor and saying, this is what I'm interested in studying, she was able to set up that directed study, do the research, and then turn that into eventually her kind of honors thesis for her capstone. So yeah, I think the nice thing about going to Clark, like Emily says, we are a research institution, but we're a small research institution. So, a lot of those research opportunities that at larger schools may be reserved for graduate students, you'll get to do as an undergrad at Clark, and you can easily approach your professors and ask them for help and how to do that. So a couple more questions have come in. I think these are all both really good questions, so I do want to address them. Maybe I'll start with this one. Are there core curriculum classes in addition to the classes that you need to fulfill for your major? So Jen, maybe you want to talk about the PLS requirements and kind of what that looks like in terms of what you get on your credit evaluation for that.
Yeah, sure. So yes, there are program of liberal studies requirements that all students need to complete in one fashion or another. And these can be completed with some of your coursework coming in from your previous institution. And so there are 9 now. So there's, verbal expression, formal analysis, that's like the mathy thing, aesthetic perspective. I won't go into it all. You can read about it on our website, but yeah, certainly you can complete a number of these with your coursework that's coming in. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the important thing to know about the program of liberal studies is that you have all of your time at Clark to complete it. So, first year students coming in would have all 4 years to complete it. You don't have to do it in your first 2 years. A lot of students, I think, do as an exploration tool, kind of check off a lot of those boxes within their first 2 years if they're not sure what they want to study or if they're trying to kind of explore the curriculum a little bit more. But as transfer students coming in, if you've already taken a good number of these, we'll let you know on your credit evaluation which courses you've already fulfilled and which ones you'll have left to take. And then you would have the rest of your time at Clark to finish those in addition to your major requirements.
And some of the program of liberal studies requirements those are fulfilled by courses that also work toward the major. So sometimes they double count.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's definitely important too. And another question we have is about the +1 master's program, or what we call the 5th year accelerated master's program. So Emily, I know that you mentioned you were kind of working towards that. Do you want to talk a little bit about what that looks like sort of as a transfer student?
Sure. So I'm applying for the Master's in Teaching program. I'll be applying by November 1st. So it's like all I've been focusing on lately. But basically, it gives you the opportunity to start taking graduate level courses during your senior year, and then staying for an additional year to finish up. I believe for first year students, or for people who start Clark during their first year of college, it's tuition free. And for transfer students, it's still a reduced tuition price for the master's program. So the application process is really easy. Actually, it's so easy that it's making me more anxious because I keep thinking that I'm like missing things, or I'm thinking, oh, this can't be it. But it really is pretty easy. It's basically just submitting like your resume, some recommendation letters, as well as some essay answers. So it is really easy, and transfer students can participate as long as you're planning it early, or just planning in advance to apply to the program. It's really easy, and it's really not that different from first year students.
Yeah, I think the 5th year program is a great opportunity for you to stay at Clark, earn that master's degree. Like Emily said, it's a little bit different for transfers depending on how long you've been at Clark or when you come into Clark. It would be reduced tuition as opposed to free tuition, but it really is still a great opportunity to get that additional education and do it at Clark for a reduced fee for that 5th year. So there's another question about pre-med or pre-health. Is there separate advisors for pre-med students? So we do have a great pre-health advising program. So you will, as part of the pre-health advising program, you don't necessarily have to be like a bio major or a science major. You can major in whatever you want. So you would have your advisor in your major, and then you also would have access to advisors in the pre-health program who are going to help you applying to medical school or to other health-related programs. They'll help you find those, maybe research opportunities or internship opportunities or things that are going to help kind of enhance your application or help enhance your experience of learning about those fields. So it's kind of like it's sort of like an extra layer of advising in addition to your academic advisor. So that looks like it's it for our questions for now, but I want to thank both Emily and Jen for being with us tonight and for answering questions and talking about the transfer student experience. I think it's always great to have a transfer student to kind of share their perspective and then have someone who works on the academic side to let you know kind of how your courses are going to transfer and what academic support there is on campus. So thank you both for your perspective and for answering questions. I don't think I mentioned this in the beginning, but I actually work with transfer students in the admissions office. I'm the transfer student coordinator. So any students who are applying to Clark as transfer students, I would be your point of contact. I'm going to throw my email in the chat. Since my name just says Clark University Admissions, my name is Nicole Zervos and my email is nzervos@clarku.edu. So if you are applying as a transfer or have any questions about the transfer process, you can feel free to email me directly. I also was a transfer student in college. I sent this to the panelists, not to everybody. I meant to do that again. I was a transfer student in college. I didn't go to Clark, but I sort of understand what it's like to go through that process, and so I'm always happy to walk students through the transfer admissions process as well.
I can add my email in the chat too if people want have a student perspective question. You don't have to, obviously, but if anyone wants to reach out, I can also answer questions.
Awesome, thank you, Emily. And Jen just did as well. Yeah, so definitely feel free to be in touch with any of us if you have questions. We know that there are many, and it's very different. Sort of each transfer student has their own kind of unique story. So we are happy to walk you through this process. So thanks again for being with us tonight. We have a number of other Clarktoberfest sessions that are going on throughout the month of October. So we've got a couple weeks left. So I definitely would encourage you to sign up for some others if you're looking to get some more in-depth information about Clark, different ones on academics and student life and different things that we offer. If you do 3 of them, you get a free t-shirt if you're a domestic student. So definitely an incentive to sign up for a couple more. But we hope to see you again on a future webinar. And thanks again for being with us tonight. Hope everyone stays healthy and stays safe.